I'm hoping to do this video in about 15 minutes, but it'll probably take just a little bit longer. Maybe we won't stretch beyond 30 minutes. I'm hoping. That probably is a lot to digest, 30 minutes of watching video, but nevertheless, I'll try my level best to get it done quickly. So, what your main task in this course is going to be doing primary, secondary source analysis and doing some writing based on primary and secondary sources. Now, the whole point of looking at primary sources is to try to get you to start thinking historically. Now, what I mean by thinking historically is that oftentimes you go to a history class and they spit out some information to you, you read it, you have to come in and you have to remember who won, the Battle of Lexington and Concord, something to that nature, and the players. That's not necessarily going to happen in this class, although at some level you're toward in the final exam you're going to have to just know some information, and that's why note taking for all the things that you do in the class, everything that you read, you should take some notes. All the videos that you watch, take notes. Everything that you do, take notes, because you have to take a final exam. But our emphasis is not on rote memory. Our emphasis is getting you to think like a historian. And why that is because so much of what we do in the professional world and in our personal lives is built on history. You have discussions with your family members, your friends about so many things. You have to kind of remember things, how things transpired, how they happened. And of course, as we talked about in the video on history, the telegraph or telephone assignment, right, where we tell one person one thing and then halfway through the dialogue completely changes. So this is why there's an emphasis on the written sources, but we all know from talking about that written sources are also problematic. So what we're trying to do, at least I'm trying to do in this class, is to get you to understand the problems with these documents, both oral history, written history, primary sources and secondary sources, is that they are full of biases, and a well-educated person ought to be able to think past through the biases. What is the person's particular political um, orientation, right? Does the person have an axe to grind, right? Are there problems with, in fact, did the person see things from two vantage points? We talked about, the elephants walking down the street, right? And people on opposite sides of the street seeing two different things. So much of what you do in your professional and personal lives will evolve around this, and I think thinking historically will help you. So on this document here, we have when addressing a historical question or event, pace yourself in thinking historically. Don't rush through the material. Try to sit back and understand what in the heck is going on. That is the first usual thing that I do when I read both primary and secondary source. I ask myself the question, well, what is this person trying to tell me? Because obviously they're trying to transmit some information from them to me. And so I want to be able to try to figure out what that information is. And then once I figure out what that information is, I'm always asking myself why. Sometimes the explanation is simple. They have a thesis statement. This topic is important for these reasons. Sometimes the thesis statement is a little bit more subtle, and you'll have to fight through that. But over time, particularly those of you who are going on to graduate school and etc., you'll get a little bit better skilled at sort of distilling this out. Now, perspectives. We must understand and uncover the different points of view in a historical question or event, right? And so that's what I was talking about in terms of the perspectives. What side of the street and what vantage point are you looking at things, right? Analyzing and sourcing documents. So when we analyze these documents, what I like to do is I always like to figure out what are people's motivations and what sources are they in fact using. And these are the 6 C's, right? And we'll go through these in just a moment, so we'll hang on to this a little bit. But the data gathering for the 6 C's, when we gather this information, that'll kind of help us right? This will be the process of analyzing, and it'll help us to distill out some of these other questions. So the context is really important, and it's part of the 6 C's, right? Which I will talk about in a moment. But context is important. One of the things that you'll want to really be careful of and really think about for both primary and secondary sources, what's the context? So, for example, when we look at European exploration, particularly when we're looking at groups like the Spaniards versus the Incas, the Mayans, the Aztecs, we all want to really be clear that the Spaniards had an agenda. And it's not that the Aztecs or the Mayans or et cetera don't have an agenda. The problem with it is that it's hard for us to find out what their agendas are because most of their documentation was destroyed. But we certainly have documentation from the Spaniards. What we just need to be careful of is figuring out what the agenda is. So every document that you get, I don't care if you go work for NASA, if you go work for McDonald's Corporation, or if you go work for the local accounting down the firm or the doctor, when you get documents and you assess their provenance, where they came from, right, and you assess that these are primary source documents, you're always wanting to be thinking about context. Now, when we get to secondary sources, context is important as well, and I'm going to explain that to you as well in that video when we talk about secondary sources. Now, the evidence that you're going to be using to connect your claim, when it is time for us to speak about the questions, we must have proof of our opinions. Okay, so have you ever gotten into an argument with somebody and they made a statement that something is like something, and then you ask them, well, where'd you get that from? And they don't have any source, and don't you get frustrated? Because what we really want are informed opinions. Everybody's got opinions, but very few people have really informed opinions. That's what you need to be thinking about as a college student, is learning how to make informed opinions, not just blatant opinions. And when you run across people who are giving you unsubstantiated or ill-informed opinions, I wouldn't say dismiss those opinions offhand. What I would say is that be suspicious of them. Now, it's not that you can't be suspicious of informed opinions, but certainly you have data that supports those opinions. And what you're trying to do then is to take that data that the person gives you and put it to your own empirical test. In other words, what you want to do is think about the material, find out how they're supporting it, read the information that they're giving to you, and make up your own mind. But it all starts with them giving you data. Now, what are the 6 C's of analyzing primary source documents? First thing you want to do is find out who's the author. Very important. What that's going to tell you is probably give you some clues to whether or not this person has agenda. So let's just say hypothetically that you're reading a document that's done by a priest of the Spanish Catholic Church, and they are talking negatively about the Aztec religion. Wouldn't you be somewhat suspicious? Now, if you found a priest that is talking positively about the Inca or Aztec religion, now wouldn't that get you to start thinking, well, maybe there's something to this. Maybe this person saw something that other people didn't. And you should pay a special attention to that. So what you want to do is you want to think about who was the person that created the document and try to find out what you can about them. The easiest way to do that is to do a simple Google search. Now, sometimes you're going to come across things where you're going to be looking up a person and you can't find out anything about them. There's just really nothing you can do about that. But you should be trying to assess why this person wrote the document in the first place. Sometimes it's just to make the people look good. Sometimes it's for information purposes. Sometimes they just admire the person. Sometimes they dislike the person and they're trying to degrade the person's reputation, and you need to find that out. Context. When was the document created? Okay, so was the document created at the exact time things happen? Let's say within 4 months, 3 months, 2 months. What happens if something happened 3 years later, 10 years later, 20 years later? Distance from an event sort of begins to make things murky. The further we are away from something, the harder it is for us to see something clearly. So what you want to do is you want to be able to figure out when the person wrote this, what was going on in the world, what's the context, what's the region, what's the locality. Maybe the person is writing about a group of people and they're not even in the country and they have no idea who these people are and never met them. Don't you think that if someone is writing about a group of people who've never spent time with them, they might have prejudices and biases? Now, probably if a person has spent time with them, they probably might know better, but then you have to be careful because we have instances where there have been people, particularly those people who over the last, say, 50 years, 100 years, who were researchers, who went into African, who went into Latin America, who went into Asian societies and wrote about people, lived amongst them, but they disliked the very people that they were researching. And we find how we found this out is that we've discovered things like people's diaries where they spoke so negatively of the people that now all we can do is see that everything they wrote about those people was completely biased. And then once we see it in that light, we can now say, oh, that's why that person said something to that context. Now, content. This one is going to be a little bit tricky because with the primary source, you're going to have to really think about this really hard to try to find out what the main ideas for the document are. Typically, in a secondary source, the author will tell you what the thesis statement is automatically. Sometimes it's a little bit harder to find, but just in general, they usually tell you that this is a paper for, my argument is, I argue that it is clear this. But with primary sources, sometimes that's not there. Sometimes people are just making an account. Right? So for example, a primary source might be something where a person is just taking the inventory. So then what is the main ideas of inventory? Well, there's probably no main idea, but you just kind of need to intuitively say, well, it's not necessarily any main idea. This primary source is just about how many barrels of rum or something to that nature, or slaves, or something that they have. And so you'll just have to just see that, well, the main purpose of this is to keep an inventory. Right? Now, are there any important details or statements in the document that tell us about the topic at hand? What point is the author trying to make? Summarize the thesis if you can. What evidence did the author give? Now, if the person in this primary source is making some substantive claim like the Aztecs were barbarians, what's the evidence for that? Well, if you don't find any, well, he just said that because he doesn't like something. And I'll give you an example. One of the things that we noticed about the conquistadors, particularly the priests that accompanied them throughout Latin America, they would always make comments about blood rituals. And of course, one of the projects of the Spaniards was to try to get the Mesoamericans to stop blood rituals. And they called these people barbarians. Then every Sunday, the priest stood before his congregation and drank the blood of Christ and ate the body of Christ. That is a blood ritual. And I know what you're thinking. You're saying, well, that's not real. It's just grape juice or something to that nature, or wine. No, that has been consecrated. So for our purposes, that is real. It is a blood sacrifice, recreated over and over and over again on Sunday. So now there are of course, some nuances to this, obviously, because in a blood ritual, sometimes it could be just from poking your skin to executing somebody. But the symbology is what's important for both, right? So you have to, on the one hand, kind of be able to say, oh, okay, so I understand that Spaniards understood what blood ritual was. Right? What is it? What's their real aversion? Maybe they were just sickened by all of the death, right? Maybe it was a good thing, right, to stop the blood rituals. That you'll have to figure out. Now, what are the connections to prior knowledge, right? So how are you able to connect knowledge from the things that you've read, the videos that you've watched, the research that you've done to that primary source. This is where I'm going to be able to tell whether or not you're doing any background research. In college, we do research. You want to be a doctor? You have to be able to do research. You want to be a scientist? You have to be able to do research. You want to be a social scientist? You have to be able to do research. So much of what we do in life is about research. Even if you're just trying to find things out, where to go pay your parking fine in a city is about research. So this is something that we all have to get used to, and I'm here to see whether or not you can do the research and connect the two. Now, communication. Is the source reliable? Does the author have any biases? We talked about that. Are these documents similar? Maybe you have 3 documents that are similar, and then you have 1 that are dissimilar. Which ones do you trust? The 3 that are the same, or the 1 that is completely different? What problems, assumptions, and ideas from this document may be unreliable? There are quite a number of documents that we thought for years were authentic, and then over time we've just decided, because of great research that's been done by historians, that these documents weren't in fact reliable. We've found people's birth certificates. They were born in other eras, years, they changed their names, etc. So what you want to be able to do is to figure this out. Conclusions. What does this say about the topic at hand? So when you're looking at the Cortez, or you're looking at De Castillo or anybody else, what does it say about the topic? Now, you're going to have to kind of do some thinking. You'll have to get into the Bailyn textbook and find out what's going on. So, okay, so if it's the death of Castillo, or the death of Moctezuma, and these eyewitness accounts, or the accounts by Castillo and Cortez, you want to be able to say to yourself, so then what do one of these documents say about Moctezuma's death or the conquest of the Aztecs, right? The documents may clue you in on something to that nature. Okay, so these are the 6 C's of analyzing the primary sources. Now I'm going to just bring you over to the document itself. All right, so here is the actual document that you're going to fill out. And this document is on MS Word, so it's a DocX document. And what you'll be able to do is type into the boxes. So this one here is, let's see. Okay, so you'll be able to type directly into the boxes and fill out the information. So the 6 C's of primary source analysis: main idea, describe in detail what you see, and you'll be able to type right in here. And you will be able to go through the entire document and just type directly into the document what you see. Now, you're going to have to check your grammar. So what I would do is probably just type all of this stuff out in MS Word on a separate document to do all your spell check, and then cut and paste. Probably is the easier way to go. That way you can do spell check without the documents. And so this is basically a 5-page, 6-page statement. Now, at the end, if there are things that you wanted to say but the box ran out, you have extra space here. So you're going to have to kind of measure yourself and make sure that you are really writing compact and concise to make sure that you can get in as much information as possible. But there is, again, at the end, a space for you to add some extra context if you need it all the way at the end. Okay, now, these documents, I listed the first one. When we go to the death of Moctezuma, I have the document here. And then for the other documents, you can simply go to the Files section, and you can find this in, oops, I don't know why that jumped. Let's go back to Files. And let's see if it's into the intro. Yeah, I think it's in Module 2. Oh, there it is, Primary Source Documents, Module 1. So it's right here under Module 1. So we click on Primary Source Documents. Oops, I'm sorry, I thought it was located here. Let's see. Yeah, there it is, Primary Source Document. So let's click on here. Oops, I am so sorry. I am getting this. I need to change the name of this. But it's, let's see if it's listed here. I will make these available to you and show you, oh, there it is. It's all the way at the end. All right, so here they are down at the bottom here. So let's go back to Files. So if we scroll down all the way down at the bottom, it says primary and secondary source documentation. They're here all the way at the bottom. All right, so I just need to go back in and change that so it won't be confusing. So primary and secondary source documents, it's in the file section right below Module 6 down at the bottom. And so you'll be able to find those there. So it's pretty self-explanatory now. If you begin to write this and you have issues, you're not sure about something, send me a message right away. I should be monitoring my Canvas all day long. So send me the information and I'll help guide you through it. Okay, that should do it. Good luck to you.